All right, guys, let's talk about algebra. So, it's kind of a fancy word and it sounds something really complicated, but actually, algebra really isn't very different from the math you've been doing since kindergarten. And in fact, you've been doing algebra without even knowing you've been doing it. So, let me show you what I mean. Algebra just means finding something that's unknown, right? Something you don't know what it is. So, really, when you were doing something in first grade and you didn't know what 3 plus 4 was, you were doing algebra because you knew that 3 plus 4 was something, you just didn't know what it was. And usually, if you remember this right, most of your teachers probably put some kind of box there. 3 plus 4 equals. And you had to find out what it was. And so you drew pictures or you played with some blocks and you stacked them up or you used the 10 counters. You did something to find out what that 3 plus 4 was equal to set. Okay, when you got a little bit older, they could put the box in a different place. So it wasn't always at the end of the equation. Sometimes they could give you a problem like this. 10 minus something equals 2. Okay, a little bit more complicated. But again, we're dealing with something we don't know what it is. We don't know what's inside that box. You don't know what it is just by looking at it. Now, yes, you guys are in 6th grade. You've had lots of exposure to these kinds of problems. You've memorized your fact families, and you can tell almost by looking at this thing, just because you haven't memorized what that box is. It is 8. 10 minus 8 equals 2. And most people, when I ask them, how did you know that that's 8? That's what they say. It's just, I do it. And yeah, that's probably true because you had that memorized. You've dealt with 10 and 2 and 8 so much that you know how they work together. But if I change this problem a little tiny bit, I put in slightly higher numbers, ones you don't have memorized, like let's say 103 minus box equals 68. Okay, something that you don't know automatically upon looking at it. We don't know the fact family between 103 and 68 and whatever the answer is. How would you solve this? It's an unknown. We don't know what it is. Well, hopefully you said, well, we could subtract the 68 from the 103. That would be the answer. And you'd be right. So 103 minus 68 would be my answer, which turns out to be 35. Okay. In algebra, we could continue using that box. We could. There would be nothing bad against it. There's no reason not to. Just that whoever invented algebra way back when didn't use a box. They used a letter. They used a letter, and usually we use the letter X. Okay. But don't freak out about that. That just means that we don't know the answer. It's just like using a box. You could use anything in the world you wanted to. You literally could. You could do 3 plus 4 equals smiley face. You could do 3 plus 4 equals triangle. You could do anything. But there are some things we don't want to do, right? We don't want to. You could use a triangle. You could use a smiley face. I wouldn't suggest using this shape because that has a name. That's 8. Now, you can't really use that because that looks like 3 plus 4 equals 8, which isn't true, right? So I wouldn't use that shape. So people were thinking about what shapes to use. They said, well, we can't use the shapes of numbers because it's confusing, right? You can't say 3 plus 4 equals 8. So they said, well, what else could we use? Hey, I know what another symbol we use a lot. We use letters of the alphabet. And so far, we don't use those in math, right? It's not like the letter F has a value, right? So we can use them for a variable. We can use them to stand for the unknown. And so that's what we do in algebra. We use a letter. Don't get tripped up about that. Okay? It doesn't matter that it's a letter. We use letters because they don't have any other purpose in math. We might as well use them to represent the unknown. Okay? Plus, they're actually pretty convenient. So if I was solving a problem where I wanted to find out, let's say, oh, Mr. Baker has a certain number of candy canes, right? He has 20 candy canes in his classroom, and he has 14 candy canes at home. How many candy canes does he have? I don't know how many they have yet. I know you can do it in your head. So one convenient thing is I could use the letter C because that's what candy cane starts with. So a lot of times on problems, you'll see a letter that stands for whatever the problem's about. C for candy canes in this case. You know, it could be D for dogs. It could be F for fish. It could be anything, right? Really, it could be anything. Um, just to make it easier, they often abbreviate it like that. But a lot of the time you'll see that. But most of the time, if you don't see that, you will see X. Don't ask me why. We're just like X. And I know that gets confusing because up to now you've used a very similar sign to mean multiplication. That's why this is confusing. I know it can be confusing. This means multiply, and this means X, and this means unknown. Isn't that kind of weird? They look very similar. So I know they do. And unfortunately, you can't change this one. You're not in charge of how problems are written and how math goes on. So you have to get used to the fact that we have changed the multiplication sign. We have changed the multiplication sign. We don't use this sign anymore in algebra. You use it in basic math. You use it on calculators. We do not ever use this for multiplying in algebra because it looks like an X. Instead, we use the dot. Okay? You have to get used to that. It just means times. It just means multiply. That's all it means. Okay? Just like this means adding, and this means subtracting, and that means multiplying. So if I wanted to do 3 times 4, I would write 3 times 4. Okay? The other thing you might see, I should mention while I'm going on with that, is the fact that, let's say I wanted to write, okay, Mr. Baker has, how shall I write this? Boy, I should have come up with this example before I started recording, huh? Let me just say this, okay? I'm thinking of a number. You don't know what the number is, so it's an unknown. So we'll call it X. All right? So we get used to that. I'm thinking of a number. If you take that number and you multiply it by 2, so multiply it by 2, you will get 14. You will get, or it will equal to, 14. Now again, you can do this in your head. You probably know already by looking at it because you have this fact family memorized. 2 and 14, well, it's got to be 7. But this is how we write it, right? There's another way of writing it you might see. Oftentimes you won't see the, again, I don't know why it is, just the way it is. People have been writing this for hundreds of years. I don't make up the rules, I just teach them. Oftentimes they won't write X times 2. They want to put it the other way. They put the 2 in front. Does it matter if you have, for example, 4 times 3 is 12? Can't you switch the 3 and the 4? 3 times 4 is 12, isn't that true? It doesn't matter what order those two factors come in. When you multiply them together, it doesn't matter what order it is. That's called a commutative property of multiplication. You can do them in any order you want, still get the same answer, right? So I could put the 2 in front of the X. That would be totally legit, and nothing would change about it. Okay, same thing. And now one more thing is, when you see it this way, they usually don't put that dot in the middle. They usually just write it as 2x. And really, that makes sense. If you have, think about what multiplication means. It means you have groups of, right? So if I have 2 groups of 1, or if I have 2 groups of 2, or 2 groups of 3, or if I have, let's say, I'm trying to think of this, 2 oranges, right? Multiplying is the same thing as just having them, having 2x. So I have 2 x's. That just means I have x plus x, right? I have 2 x's. So I don't really need to say I have 2 times x. I could just say I have 2 x's. And that's kind of what this looks like. I have 2 x's, all right? Or 2 times x. Okay, so that's the other thing you need to know. If you don't see a sign between it, there's no plus sign, there's no minus sign, there's no dividing sign, then it automatically means multiplication. The other thing I would say is sometimes you might see multiplication. I know I'm kind of going lots of tangents here, but that's okay. Sometimes multiplication used in this way, parentheses. That also means multiplying. Right? That means 2 times x, just like the other ways we've seen it. Okay. All right. Let's talk about really briefly before I end the video about why. So we talked about we use variables when we don't know the answer to something. So in math, we never use this. I see this sometimes. Students write IDK. I don't know. We don't do that. You're in math now. Guess what? There's a better way of doing it. You just write X. Bam. That's it. So if I ask you, okay, if Mr. Baker has 114 coins and he gives away 83 of them. How many does he have? You say, I don't know. You can put that, but you got to put it with X now, and you have to show your work. He had 100, I don't even know what I said. I'll make this up now. 132 coins, and he got rid of 88 of them. How many does he have? Well, I don't know, but he has X. All right, this is a totally legitimate equation here. 102 minus 88 equals X. And that'd be a lot better than saying I don't know. That'd be a lot better than saying I don't know. You still haven't done any work, by the way. I still haven't done any math. All I did was write down what I just said and put an X. But this is math. This is algebra. Whereas I don't know is giving up. Okay. So that's it for this video about uh, one reason we use variables. Okay, they are, again, they're letters of the alphabet that represent an unknown quantity, an unknown something. Now, it might be something really easy to find out, it might be something really hard to find out, but it's something that we just don't know yet, and we're going to find out. In the next video, we're going to talk about the other reason we use variables. There's two reasons. One of them is for an unknown, and next video up,